holiday season, as I was looking for gifts, I noticed that almost everything had a warning label attached to it. I'm not just talking about power tools. Warnings are placed on medicines, on kids' toys, and puzzles, and bottles, and kitchen utensils, and gas cans, and spicy foods even. And I guess that's fine, because nobody wants to get hurt, or more likely, companies don't want to get sued for not properly warning people that coffee's hot. But at the same time, it's also created a hypersensitivity to anything that can, well, change us physically, emotionally, or mentally. So I got caught up in this mentality, and I feel the need this morning to issue you a warning. I have to warn you that the story you will hear is dangerous. And if you continue to sit here and actually listen, well, I cannot be responsible for what happens. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it's been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search out diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. It does not seem to matter what culture you look at or where that culture existed. Nearly all ancient cultures told stories about the dangers of places that were not their homes, otherwise known as the wilderness. So think about this for a second. Long, long ago, the world was such a different place. Most people lived and died in the same community that they were born in. Part of it was logistics. I mean, there were no roads or cars, and the forests and the mountains and the rivers and the oceans were just so big that it was incredibly hard to get anywhere, and it was just dangerous. So the other reason people did not leave their small area was that the notion of home and family was very important. Home was safe. The town or city had walls around it. It was familiar. Family members helped support each other. There were shared values at home. Same thing with customs. Being home made so much sense. Now, outside of the walls of the village and outside of the community, well, that was where the other lived. Outside the walls was the unknown. Outside the walls, you did not know what you would find. And so here's what happened. The ancient Greeks and the Celts and the Egyptians and the Norse people and almost every other culture had stories about the wilderness. Stories about the monsters and deities that lived in the wilderness and what can happen if you dare to venture outside your community, if you dare to leave home. You can read these stories for yourself. They are incredibly fascinating, but let me give you a spoiler alert. In these kind of wilderness stories that were told in the ancient world, everyone dies. The wilderness and the other who lives in the wilderness are dangerous and nothing like you, so don't go there. That was the message. And if you do, be warned. That is why these stories existed. They served as a warning and as a teaching tool. So that's why the opening of the gospel story that we heard surprises me every time. Wise men came from the east. So speculate with me just a little bit. What motivates these Arab astrologers to go against so much cultural pressure to stay put and venture out into the difficulty and to the danger of the wilderness? What do they hope to find? Why would they risk so much? What do they hope to get out of the deal? I mean, surely the potential reward or compensation must have been huge to offset such a risky behavior, a risky endeavor. So keep that thought while I add this side note. We run into problems when we treat the biblical story as if they were matter-of-fact kind of stories, as if they were stories told from an objective reality, like a reporter on TV narrating the events going on behind her. That's not what these stories are. When we hear that wise men came from the east, we're not meant to go, oh, that's nice, as if we're just being told a simple fact. No, the biblical stories are so much more than that. They are a community's thoughts as they wrestle with discerning the nature of God and what it means to be human. So when we hear that wise men came from the east, we should be asking the question, well, what does that mean? What does that mean about the nature of God and what it means to be a human being? What does that mean about us surviving and thriving in life? So what does it mean that it is in the danger of the wilderness that astrologers encounter Jesus? From a different perspective, through a Jewish lens, what does it mean that non-Jewish pagans from the outside wilderness show up to honor Jesus? Because yes, the dangers of the wilderness are always relative to where you live. What does it mean to so openly call Jesus King of the Jews, knowing that is a treasonous statement to the Roman occupiers who appoint the King of the Jews? I mean, there's so much at stake here. There's so much at risk going on in this story, and then this happens. When the star stops, when the destination's found, when the encounter with Jesus takes place, it's said that there is an overwhelming sense of joy. Within the dangers of the wilderness, in the presence of a power-obsessed king, in the mixing of very different people, joy is the outcome. Joy is what happens. Now, there is a huge difference between joy and happiness. Happiness tends to be externally triggered and is based on other people, things, places, thoughts, and events. So it can come and go very quickly. And in many ways, it's superficial and very cheap. Joy is different. It is much more consistent because it is cultivated inside of you, internally. It's less tied to our external set of circumstances. It comes when we make peace with who we are, how we are, what we are, in light of everything that is going on around us. So many of us have lost touch with the feeling of joy, not knowing how to cultivate it anymore. You can see this when people talk about feeling empty or dissatisfied inside, and then try to resolve that feeling through quick fixes like alcohol, drugs, sex, addictive foods, buying stuff, other things. Or they find fleeting moments of happiness from other places without ever really truly being satisfied with what's going on in their life. We are doing so many things. Kids are doing so many things, and not much is leading us to experience joy. Mainly just fleeting moments of happiness. Now, I do believe strongly that God wants the best possible life for all of God's creation. I believe that the way of Jesus and God's dream for how the world should and could be, that it leads us to joy. In fact, that's all it can lead to, because joy is the outcome of love and grace and peace and mercy and compassion and forgiveness. But be warned. Be warned. Today's gospel locates this divine joy in a really dangerous and odd place. The wilderness. That's not an accident. In fact, it's a theme. When John comes baptizing and preaching, where does that take place? The wilderness. When Jesus is baptized, he is driven to where? The wilderness. When Jesus is seeking to reconnect with who he is and what he's called to do, he goes away. He goes in retreat to where? the wilderness. Now understand this, the wilderness is not a retreat center in the woods. It's not a lake home. And if we seek to follow Jesus and to discover a deep sense of divine joy, we also have to go like the Magi to meet Jesus in the wilderness. And what does that look like? Well, the wilderness looks like those places where you don't necessarily want to be and doing those things that you don't necessarily want to do. If you are younger and in school, the wilderness is risking social suicide by eating with a new student or the weird kid at lunch, the one everybody ignores. The wilderness is wishing the best to someone who's hurt you. The wilderness is getting to know and being open to someone whose lifestyle you disagree with. The wilderness is giving your time to an organization that operates in the part of town that you don't want to go after dark. The wilderness is allowing yourself to feel the pain of another in a place far away. It's sitting up with the person who is grieving the loss of a loved one. It's speaking up for the least. It's paying for the stranger behind you in the drive-through line and practicing generosity in a way that does not bring the focus back on you. The wilderness is new and different experiences. It's taking a risk and a chance for the sake of mercy, for the sake of making God's love known in this world. The wilderness is a place where you are vulnerable because you are no longer blending into the crowd. You are opening yourself up, and in doing so, you run the risk of rejection and being shamed by another. And yet this is the wilderness where we consistently find Jesus. So, if you're still listening and did not heed my warning earlier, then I challenge you to think about one place of wilderness in your life right now, and then make the commitment to go there in the next week. Not because you should or you're obligated to, but because that is where we find Christ. It's where we find God. It's where we find the divine joy in our lives. But again, I have to warn you, be warned, things will change if you go. You will be changed, but so will the lives of others that you touch. So will your community. So will the world. That is the story of our faith. That is the good news we hear today. Thanks be to God for that. Amen. As a way of taking today's message and reading a little bit deeper into your life, here are a couple of reflection questions for you. Number one, what is the difference between happiness and joy? Where have you experienced joy in your life? And number two, is it possible to reframe the wilderness events in your life to find joy in those moments? Do you think that's possible?